Welcome, everyone, to our Happy New Year, and welcome back to our Funding Fridays webinar series. This is our first event of 2021 in our 2020-21 season. So today we will be discussing, as you can see from this page, the NSF Broader Impacts Review Criterion and writing the NSF Broader Impact Statement. Since September, we've been holding these research and professional development webinars every month, usually on the first Friday of the month. As you can see, this is not the first Friday, but given the holidays, we thought we'd put in a little buffer time. So the Funding Fridays webinar series was launched this past fall by Associate Vice Chancellor Tamara Snyder as a way to, as we were brainstorming all during the summer and the spring, thinking about ways to provide targeted support for faculty during this, as I'm sure you can all appreciate, particularly difficult period of sort of shutdown and uncertainty and isolation, and trying to figure out new and creative ways to reach out to faculty and help them with their research development activities. So this webinar series also represents a welcome collaboration between the Office of Research. Oh, I'm sorry, I always forget to introduce myself. I am Effie McLaughlin. I'm the Interim Assistant Dean for Research in the Office of Research, and I have been doing, I've been running programs and running internal grant programs and doing research development work for the Office of Research for nearly 10 years now. So I'm very familiar with that. So, and then also this is a collaboration. This is the first time that we've really explicitly collaborated between the Office of Research, the Research Foundation's Office of Award Pre-Proposal Support, or RFAPS, which actually John Cepogus, who will speaking to you here today, is the director of that office, and also the CUNY Office of Library Services, who are who are running several more sort of professional development, getting your work published, promoting your impact, your professional impact online type webinars. And actually, Remy, could you actually you can't, never mind. I will put up all this, there's a full program, and if you haven't seen our website, we have a landing page for the Funding Fridays on our website, and I'll throw that up in a minute. If any of you happen to find this through an email rather than going to our website. So that said, the goal of this webinar series is to create a living resource for research development support and information for researchers at all levels across the university. So these webinars are being recorded and made available on the Office of Research website. So we encourage all of you to provide feedback on these on an ongoing basis, and also make suggestions for future topics, because hopefully this will be an ongoing webinar series. We're always looking for new topics that will help you in your research development efforts. So just a little bit of housekeeping first. So the presentation will run about 40 to 45 minutes. And we always try to leave ample time at the end for all of your questions, because that's really the point of this, is to get your questions answered. So my colleague Remy Dar, who many of you can see, is going to be advancing the slides, and I'm going to be more or less moderating the discussion and also monitoring the chat. So please feel free at any point during the presentation, if you have any questions, type them in the chat, and we will make every effort to go back at the end and make sure that we can capture all your questions. But we're going to let the speakers do their presentation and then come back at the end, and you can ask them any questions that you have. So let me very briefly introduce the speakers to you. So John Cepogus, as I mentioned, is the director of the Pre-Proposal Support Office at the Research Foundation, or RFAPS. In his previous position, he was the program director for global initiatives at the NSF Office of International Science and Engineering. And he also has, so he was at the NSF for a long time, so obviously he brings a great deal of experience to this topic with him. But he has over 35 years of experience working as a director and program officer and senior analyst in numerous government agencies. So he has a lot of experience with federal funding. And Josh Brumberg is the Dean for Sciences at the Graduate Center, where he oversees all of the science doctoral programs. He's also a professor of behavioral and cognitive neuroscience in the clinical psychology program at Queens College. And he himself has received significant federal funding to conduct his own research, and as dean, he has supported faculty across the university to advance their research endeavors over the last few years. So welcome, John and Josh, and take it away.
Thank you, Effie. A special thanks to the Office of Research Tamara, Effie, and Remy in general for doing such a great job in hosting these Funding Friday webinar series. I think judging from the number of participants, there's huge interest across CUNY, and look forward to working on this effort. Also, thanks, Josh, for joining me in this effort. I think your experience as a researcher and also dean for the sciences at the Graduate Center really brings a tremendous amount of expertise to this whole area of broader impacts. I should say that that my um, that my tenure at NSF really gave me some interesting perspective on this whole issue of broader impacts. And I remember during these years reviewing hundreds of proposals and looking at how outstanding they were from an intellectual merit perspective. And they were rated outstanding from an intellectual merit perspective. But I have to say, majority of the proposals that I saw were very weak when it came to broader impacts. So obviously, scientists and in general, individuals who are developing these proposals really have a hard time trying to uh, develop broader impact activities, and I have a hard time of explaining the importance of their broader impacts. So we're during this workshop, we want to help you. We want to share with you our perspectives on this broader impacts criteria. I'll give you the NSF definition of broader impacts, the NSF's rationale and history behind broader impacts, and how your research should be connected to your broader impacts. I'll also share with you how NSF review panels evaluate broader impacts. Josh will provide you with examples of broader impacts from CUNY awards. He'll discuss the ingredients of the on what a competitive broader impact plan looks like. He'll share with you other resources available to you as you develop the broader impacts in your proposals. And we do want to leave ample time at the end so that we can address your individual questions. I feel that addressing individual questions really is where it's at. That's where we can really provide you some real good guidance. I'll take the next slide. Okay, so this is NSF's definition of broader impacts. Very simple. The potential to benefit society and contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes. That's how they define it. Desired outcomes are not named here. They've pretty much left it very, very simple. I'll take the next slide. So, broader impacts activities must have the potential to produce positive societal impacts. So, what do they mean by positive societal impacts? Through the research itself. So, for example, an example of societal impact on a geosciences proposal is forecasting when a volcano is getting ready to erupt. That's clearly a societal benefit. Or accurately measuring a rise in sea levels in a global climate change proposal. That's clearly a broader impact brought about from the research that is being conducted in the proposal through the activities that are directly related to specific research projects. Okay, for example, if you're using students or early career scientists or postdocs in your research, that clearly is a broader impact. And then through activities that are supported by but are complementary to the project. A few examples that come to mind are educational workshops for high school students, and conducting a community outreach effort where you share with the public at large the details of your research. No doubt those are important broader impacts. And I'll go into some more detail, and Josh will, on more examples of broader impacts. I'll take the next slide. History of this the broader impact criteria. What I want to do here, I want to give you a little perspective as to how and why broader impacts are important from NSF's perspective, and why NSF has highlighted it, this as an important criteria in the way they review their research. That this explanation will help you understand where this is broader impact criteria is coming from. So when you draft your broader impacts, it's important to keep in mind the laws that created and reaffirmed the broader impacts criteria. In 1997, NSF simplified the merit review criteria from 4 to 2. And yes, I was at NSF in 1997 when this happened. NSF had 4 review criteria at that time. It went down to 2 review criteria. They tried to simplify it because the 4 criteria were creating chaos and difficulty for the researchers. So there's 2 criteria, review criteria are intellectual merit and broader impact. In 2010, in the America Competes Act, NSF reaffirmed these 2 review criteria. And this is what they said about broader impacts. They looked at this as broader impacts as an opportunity to increase the economic competitiveness of the United States. So if your proposal is increasing the competitiveness, it's creating research that is making science much more competitive, then that's what you can address in your proposals. The development of a globally competitive STEM workforce, increasing the participation of women and underrepresented minorities in STEM. These are all important criteria. Increasing the partnership between academia and industry, improving K through 12 STEM education and teacher development, improved undergraduate STEM education, increasing public scientific literacy, and increasing national security. This is what the law reaffirmed in back in 2010. So I'll take the next slide. So NSF made it very, very simple. Two review criteria: intellectual merit, basically the potential to advance knowledge, and then to advance the science and increase discovery. And then broader impacts, societal benefits, really making obvious the relevance of funding research is what they were after here. Important to keep in mind, both of these review criteria are equally important. Do not write your proposal thinking that one is more important than the other. They are both extremely important criteria in the development of your proposals. Both criteria should be given full consideration during the development, its review, and the decision-making process. I'll take the next slide. Okay, so, broader impacts, although not, they're not defined as such by other agencies, broader impacts are really included in any proposal that should be included in any proposal that you submit to other agencies as well. For example, NIH requires that you define what the core benefit is in improvements to health. That clearly is a broader impact. The Department of Defense, the broader impact is, of course, protecting the nation, and anything in the proposals that does that is a broader impact. Department of Education, an educated population is a broader impact. For NSF, these benefits are both knowledge discovery and societal impacts. And I'll take the next slide. So why does NSF insist on broader impact? Well, primarily because public funds, taxes, are used to pay for the research. When the public pays for science research, science funding, of course, is very much influenced by the taxpayer needs. Research, especially basic science, can be perceived as abstract and disconnected from people's lives. So it's important that we make it very clear to how there is a connection between the research that's being proposed and the impact it's having on people's lives. And broader impacts are also a way to make the connection between science and people's lives more transparent. We all need to play an active role in highlighting the importance of research to the extent that there is a greater appreciation for the science. Better use may be made of the science, how it becomes more likely that funding, once we do this, it becomes more likely that funding will continue and scientists learn from individuals who are benefiting from the research that they are conducting. Next slide, please. So I like to make this quote from our former NSF director, France Cordova. In 2014, she said that as a federal agency, NSF needs to stay relevant with those who entrust us with taxpayer funds. We need to reach out to Congress and other stakeholders and be proactive in explaining what NSF is about and why we're vital to the nation's future. Not enough of our fellow citizens understand how relevant the research is to their daily lives. That kind of encapsulates the important reasons why this broader impact criteria is a requirement in the proposals that NSF is asking you to develop and submit to them. I'll take the next slide. Broader impacts. When you develop your broader impacts, they should not be generic. They should be very closely tied to the research that you're proposing. They should also be designed for a specific audience. You should also make sure that you're addressing the value they're adding to society and to people's lives. And you should, as I mentioned, you should directly tie them to the scientific merit premise of your proposal. Again, NSF is not prescriptive. It's relying on the individual principal investigators to articulate and to present the broader impact activities in the proposal, and also to articulate how and why they are broader impacts. I'll take the next slide. The only constraints I think that really, when you're looking at this, is to make sure that broader impacts are closely tied to funding innovative science. NSF projects in the aggregate should contribute more broadly to achieving societal goals. It's important that these research, education, and or outreach activities are articulated through these broader impacts. I'll take the next slide. One other comment I think I need to make here is that broader impacts are truly opportunities to collaborate with others. So as you develop your broader impacts, it's important to recognize that reaching out to faculty within your departments and in your institution, to other scientists, postdocs, or students, artists or media professionals, individuals engaged in scientific outreach and communication are also important. Josh will talk a little bit about some of the CUNY projects that have done this. The general, the citizens, teachers in K through 12, community groups, policy-oriented groups and societies like the American Association for the Advancement of Science, or if you're a geophysicist, the American Geophysical Union, if you're a statistician, the American Statistical Organization. All of these groups are really, anytime you engage with any of these groups, it really is an attempt at invoking the broader impacts of your proposed research. I'll take the next slide. Now, Remy, I'll take the next slide.
Looks like Remy's frozen.
Okay.
Let me think what we can do. Let's see. Can I unshare? Let me see if I can.
Do you see it? I just changed it to next slide.
Oh, no. You're frozen in my screen, Remy.
You're frozen.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh, there you go. You're back. Thank you.
Okay, let me make a few comments about how broader impacts are reviewed. Broader impacts in general are reviewed in similar ways that your intellectual merit your write-up is reviewed. So what is the potential for the proposed activity to benefit society? To what extent do the proposed activities suggest and explore creative, original, or potentially transformative broader impacts activities, right? Is the plan for carrying out the proposed activity well-reasoned, well-organized, based on a sound rationale? Does the plan incorporate a mechanism to assess success? How well qualified are the individuals who are leading these broader impact activities? And then are there adequate resources to the PI to carry out the proposed activities? So let me stop there. I think I've exceeded my time limit and turn it over to Josh so that we can have enough time to have some questions and answers.
Thanks, John, for putting that in context. And Remy, we can go to the next slide. And this really want to emphasize
This is the
about
one,
the
right?
reviewing.
This is the
Yeah.
one?
Yeah.
Yep. I was on an
Okay.
NSF review panel on Tuesday, and while your grant won't get funded if the intellectual merit is bad, the same goes for the broader impact. You could have the best scientific basis for your experiments, but if you give short shift to the broader impacts, it won't be funded no matter how good the science is. So just to reiterate some of the examples of broader impact activities, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Design curricula for K through 12. It's very important to do this. If you're working on some sort of scientific subject, is there a way that you can distill it and push it out into K through 12? And to echo something that John talked is many of the CUNY campuses have departments or schools of education that have vast interactions with the New York City public school system and can provide an avenue in which you could find teachers that might want to engage or bring this type of enrichment activity to their classroom. And then it's very easily to relate your science to the curriculum, because obviously you're going to be talking about the science you're proposing in your grant. You can host a professional development workshop for teachers. This happens at all our campuses. Most of it is about pedagogy, and you could certainly reach out to the people that organize these on your campus and see if you could talk about teaching of science. Many campuses, including my home campus, Queens, I'll show an example of this, host a summer high school enrichment program or have lab tours. Make sure your lab is on the tours as one example of the outreach. Encourage the students that you might be funding on the grant to be involved in the broader impact activities. It doesn't just have to be you, it also can be other people that are funded on the grant to show that the broader impacts are really woven into the fabric of the grant. Host students in your lab. Obviously, this is only minimal, and if this is the only thing you do, it will not be sufficient, but it is an example to show that you really are committed to the broader impact, whether you're hosting a student from your own campus or from a high school. Incorporate the use of technology and media into your classroom. This, of course, would apply to some grants if you're what I do, which is very biological, maybe not as apropos. Develop or participate in educational talks or programs to the public. Some campuses have speaker bureaus where they provide their faculty to speak either to community groups or into high schools or junior high schools. Get your name and become involved with those type of outreach activities. I've seen a lot. I know Hunter has been doing this. The Graduate Center has been doing this. Queens College has been doing this. And I assume other campuses have been doing this during the time of COVID. So providing your content in some sort of online forum. Contribute to a blog or a digital library, basically writing about your science for the public. We've worked with graduate students at the GC about this. We're having actually a science communications workshop next week on Friday for graduate students. So if you want to get your students a heads up, make sure they respond to the registration. And design an exhibit for a museum. Several campuses have science museums or displays. We'll talk about that. And there are also many many science museums or museums that have science content throughout the 5 boroughs, and you can become involved in some way. So next slide, please. So here's some examples of stuff we've done at the Graduate Center. This is by no means exhaustive, just in the last semester, so you just get an idea. So here are 3 panels. One we did, if you look at the, I think, you can't see my arrow, so the top left where you see the pink dots in the middle was a professor from the University of Toronto, and on the right, Shawnee Elbaum Garfinkel, who's in the biochemistry program at the Graduate Center and at the structural biology at ASRC. They basically gave a 1-hour talk about their understanding of what they call phase separation. So just basically think about what you can learn from lava lamps to understand what's happening at the cellular level. And this was associated with a conference that we were hosting at the Graduate Center. So this was an example of public outreach that we did through a Zoom webinar. Similarly, the one on the below on the left is Sebastian Alvarado, who is a professor of biology at Queens College, who wrote a book about the science of superheroes. So he, along with Shane on the right, who's a professor of biology at UCLA, who hosts the Biology of Superheroes podcast, we had a panel discussion about how you can use superheroes to teach scientific concepts. Things like gene mutation is one such example, and this was for a public audience. And you can reach hundreds now, and then this has a life because you can record the seminar, just like today's seminar is being recorded, and put it on YouTube, and then provide stats, because we're going to talk about assessment as being a part of broader impacts. And finally, on the right, the individual from the second to right with the blue shirt is Bill Solecki, who's the chair of the Department of Geography at Hunter College. And we hosted a seminar that included the individual on the left was from the World Bank, the woman with the blue sweater was from UCLA, and the woman on the right was from the National Laboratory. And we talked about how COVID and the lockdowns were impacting the environment and affecting greenhouse gas. So these are examples, and Bill is NSF funded, and this is an example of outreach. So another example is on the next slide. So here is getting to working with museums. Hopefully you've visited many of these museums. On the top left is the American Museum of Natural History. We have very deep interactions across many different levels with the American Museum of Natural History. On the top center, the New York Botanical Gardens, we have a joint PhD program in plant sciences with them. In the center is the illumination space at the ASRC, which does community tours as well as classroom visits. The New York Hall of Sciences, which is a part of the Flushing Meadow Corona Park complex. And then on the bottom left is the City College Planetarium. All these venues are where the public comes in and interacts with different aspects of science. And there is the Children's Museum in Manhattan. There is the Children's Museum in Brooklyn. And there's also a science museum in the zoo in Staten Island. So there are many different venues where you could potentially outreach. And they have different venues where students could serve as docents. They have explained the science opportunities, and these are great opportunities for outreach for a public you might not normally reach. Next slide. So this is the route I've gone. It's a little hard to see, but one thing, as of course, is teaching the next generation of scientists is something that John mentioned. And so here are 4 articles, peer-reviewed journal on the teaching of undergraduate neuroscience. So it's the Journal of Undergraduate Neuroscience Education. Virtually every academic field has a pedagogy or a teaching journal, whether it's in the STEM or the social sciences, and I believe also in the humanities. So these are examples of where we're doing something in my research lab. We figured out how to teach those principles in a classroom lab, and then we wrote it up for public dissemination. This is actually an open access journal, but you could of course put open access fees in your budget, and we'll get to buy. It's important to have a budget for broader impacts. And I know for several of these articles, one which is teaching neurophysiology using the cockroach has actually been adopted by dozens of universities across America and has been taught as a workshop. And another one which is using the Allen Brain Atlas to teach neuroanatomy, I was actually invited to give a plenary lecture at the Society for Neuroscience about this very thing. So it was over 500 people in the audience, and that was actually a broader impact that I could show that it's been disseminated, and we know that it's been adopted by many other colleges and universities, especially now in the time of COVID. Another example is on the next slide. So as I mentioned, campus-based summer science programs here. I participated this for many years at Queens. I taught a lab. I've given lectures. I involved my lab in the lab tours. I know others exist on other campuses. And this is basically promoting science and encouraging individuals to go into STEM fields. And so this has societal value. And it's also a lot of fun to interact with high school students before they become too cynical. The next slide. Here's an example of something we've pivoted to at the ASRC. If you say, hey, we can't have lab visits, we can't have the summer school, et cetera, because of COVID-19 restrictions. Here, this is Ori Schaefer working with the outreach coordinator, Kendra Kruger at the Advanced Science Research Center, figured out how to do a online enrichment activity. We now have several of these, and educators, we have ones that are pitched at different levels, can reach out and talk to us. They can watch videos. We provide lesson plans, and there's ways in which they can bring this enrichment activity to their classroom. Next slide. One thing John mentioned is training a diverse scientific workforce. We should be very proud of what we're doing here at CUNY to that effort and how diverse our undergraduate student populations are. This is a slide that I stole from the Office of Institutional Research, which is on the CUNY main website. Every one of your campuses has an Office of Institutional Research. They might call it a different thing, but you could get campus-specific data specific to your major, and you can work that in to your broader impact. And you know, remember, scientists are reviewing your broader impact, and at least I can speak for myself, I like to see data. So instead of saying that you have a diverse population, if you can put in some data, it really also shows that you've been thinking about the issue, and it's not just supposing about the issue. The next slide. So remember, the NSF standard NSF proposal is 15 pages. And what John and I recommend is that probably at least 2 pages should be devoted to your broader impacts. Anything less than that begins to give the reviewer the thought that you're really not committed to this aspect. And remember, it accounts for 50% of your score. Meaningful, but not a scale that would interfere with the ability to conduct the proposed research. You want to make it such that the major emphasis in terms of your effort, for those of you in the grant world, that means something, is devoted to the scientific, or in the NSF terms, intellectual merit. You shouldn't be spending more time on the outreach efforts, with the exception that there are NSF grants that are specifically targeted to outreach, but that is a whole different ballgame. The broader impact section must be comparable in strength and quality to the proposal's intellectual merit description. So don't leave this for the last thing. We all know how to write science, but some of us haven't had a lot of experience writing the broader impact. So I really, just like what I say with a regular grant, write the broader impacts and have someone read it over. And the nice thing about broader impacts, it doesn't need to be a scientist. In many ways, if you have someone from outside your specific area in your department, or maybe through a collaboration, someone in another department or division, to provide some insight, does it make sense? Is it workable? And is it done at an appropriate scale? Follow through is important. Well, this way Zoom things, the chat hit the slide. Don't propose anything under broader impacts that you won't be able to deliver. So if you haven't done something before, you want to give the reviewer the confidence that you can do it. So one way you would do that from a scientific standpoint is you would have a letter of collaboration. So maybe if you're going to do outreach activities to a community group or to schools, you would have the liaison with the school or the community group write a letter of support saying that they're going to welcome you. And so there's some confidence in the reviewer that this activity is going to happen and it's going to be successful and there won't be a barrier to getting it done. Next slide. So what are the ingredients? And I want to say very clear with just like with intellectual merit, one size does not fit all. So these are just suggestions and doesn't necessarily mean that everyone needs every aspect, but it does has to be it has to be a distinguished activity, as John talked about earlier. I once was on an NSF grant review panel, and for some issues, the head of the biology directorate came in, and I had two questions because we were there very long. We started at 8 o'clock in the morning. The panel was still going straight at 8 p.m. They didn't even let us take a lunch, long story. And so I asked, was there a candy machine? There wasn't, but she sent someone else to get us M&Ms. And number two, I said, well, what is a broader impact? And with a straight face, her answer is whatever you define it to be. Meaning you have great latitude. And if you can convince the reviewer that it has societal benefit, that it is a serious effort, it's integrated into your program, and you can do it, then that's a broader impact. So these examples I give above are not by no means exhaustive. So include a means to assess success. We've all heard about assessment over and over again on the academic side. How do we know that our students are learning X? What is our plan for assessment? Then how are we going to use from those assessment results to then motivate future improvements in curriculum or class outreach, et cetera, et cetera. The same care that we've done with our assessment plans on the pedagogical side, we have to do with our broader impacts. How do you know that if you're doing outreach, the people are gaining any understanding of science and they're not just there for the nap? You know, so many of, as I said, every campus has an institutional research office. They're very skilled in assessment. Many of you are on campuses that have educational departments or divisions that might even have a program in assessment. We have one at the graduate school, a PhD program in educational psychology, and one of their main tracks is assessment. There are experts on your campus, and as John said, this is an opportunity to reach out and to talk to someone. And it's important that you talk to them at the beginning of the development of the activity so you can make an activity that is accessible. There should be a budget. That's one way in grants that's serious. I mean, obviously, NSF budgets are not that expansive, so we're not talking a huge amount, but maybe you want to do some online survey and you're going to use Qualtrics. The cost for using Qualtrics, maybe the cost for having one of these people help you with assessment, a consulting fee. These are examples of a broader impact budget. If you're creating some activity for a classroom, maybe money for the materials that are needed for said activity. And so ensure that adequate resources will be available to yourself, the PI, to carry out the activities, and include a dissemination plan. For some of it is quite obvious. If you're giving a video blog, if you're doing an online panel, you're proposing to write educational articles, dissemination is built in. But if you're doing something else, talk about how you're impacting more than just that one or two students that might be working in your lab. There has to be a way in which your science is getting outside of just the scientific community. And I shouldn't say just science, because obviously NSF supports economics research, and behavioral science research more generally. Next slide. So as I said, we said it is distinguished. It should not be predictable. It shouldn't be canned or to be tacked on to what is obviously a pure research proposal. So length matters, budget matters, and you should show how the broader impact is in some way an outgrowth and certainly related to the scientific part of the proposal. Do a lit review. You would never submit a grant about science where you didn't do a lit review and show what the context of your field was, what is previously known for your field, or how you will justify using technique X or Y. The same rigor has to be applied to the broader impacts. As I said, every field has a teaching journal. There are also journals about scientific outreach. You can do a lit review if you have any questions. I know we actually have the Office of Library Sciences or Services, I think it's Sciences, is one of the sponsors. They've made it very clear that on every campus, you have a departmental liaison. Reach out to that individual and they can help you, because maybe PubMed is not the appropriate database to do these searches. So you can reach out to the librarians on your campus to find out what is the appropriate way to do this search. If you claim it as transformative, now remember, this is one of NSF's favorite world, which is basically mean you're gonna, create something that is gonna redefine the way we exist in the world. The example I always say is the cell phone. Defend that assertion. Don't say you're going to redefine the way education means in society unless you're really doing that. Show that the implementation of the broader impacts will literally revolutionize the area of your focus. Now that's going to be hard, but if you can show that you're doing outreach, that you're improving scientific literacy, if you're creating a benefit to society, as John said, that's enough. You don't have to redefine the world in which we're in. Next slide, please. Be qualified. Everything that you propose must be within your team's capabilities. If you're saying you're going to create a website, but you haven't even created a website for your own lab, there might be some skepticism. If you say you're going to create an art exhibit based on the research you're doing and display that at some gallery, if you have no background in art and no collaborator in art, don't propose that. It has to be feasible. Just the same way people would evaluate your science, that you would have preliminary results, you would have published in this area, the same kind of proof that you use for the scientific merit, the intellectual merit, you should also think about for the broader impacts. If unpaid outside services are required to make the project feasible, you need letters that are committed, that they have the expertise, or they're going to provide you the venue. That needs to be clear and spelled out in the letters. And if you have to pay for services, make sure they're in the budget. The next slide. And as I said, a budget is essential. This is one way to show that you're really serious. If you're creating some sort of video, there's a lot of things that are now going on online. Graduate students are creating video logs or vlogs. There's Skype the Scientist programs. Many professional societies are now having enrichment through video logs. And if you want to have a videographer, that costs money. Include that. If you're having an educational consultant that is helping with assessment, often that doesn't come for free. If you need the supplies to create outreach, that also might cost you something. One example would be, you do structural biology and you want to do 3D printing of different molecules and then show how they fit together as your activity. You could imagine requesting a 3D printer. I should point out that sometimes you get things for your broader impact that might also have scientific value, and that would further strengthen the interdigitation of the scientific merit with the broader impact, and it will then seem as kind of an organic and not just tacked on at the end. Assessing student learning, that can be done through online surveys or in-person surveys. And how are you going to evaluate the broader impact? And now the one thing I should point out that sometimes people forget, when we're evaluating a broader impact, in many cases that means you're evaluating human beings. And for many of us who do research involving animals, we think about institutional animal care and use committee approvals. If we're a chemist or a physicist and we don't deal with anything living at all, we don't even worry about that. Those of us in the behavioral sciences, of course, always think about Human Research Protection Program and institutional review boards. And if you're going to do assessments of broader impacts, if it's purely for quality intervention purposes, you might be exempted and you don't have to get an IRB approval. But if you want to disseminate this through a publication, in many cases, it might require IRB approval. And so what I recommend doing at the onset is reach out to your Human Research Protection Program coordinator. There is a coordinator at every campus. Discuss what you want to do and see if you have to get any additional approvals, and they can walk you through the process. It is not that complicated. Next slide, please. Provide an evaluation or assessment plan based on appropriate metrics. Logic models are helpful. The nice thing about those, you don't need to have the data up front. You can kind of talk about, and you might do X or Y depending on what the results may be. Have objectives and outcomes, and the evaluation plan most of all should be fit and tied to what you're doing, and have some way to evaluate if your broader impacts are going to lead to your desired outcomes, and have the resources to do it. Next slide. Be passionate about what you're doing. Propose educational outreach activities that build on what you're passionate about. They should mirror your interests. They'll be easier for you to write. And your own enthusiasm for your broader impacts will probably generate more reviewer enthusiasm. If you're a person who likes to give talks, doing these kind of public outreach is great. But if you're a person who's much more introverted, maybe think about writing the article so you don't have to interact with other humans. They're both equally as good. Next slide. This is from a consortium on ocean science. This is, they kind of have an online wizard, and many people have been asking, yes, we're going to post all these slides on the Office of Research website, and so you can get the URL there. Okay, next slide. The National Alliance for Broader Impacts has a kind of a planning guide when you're getting it going. Is the target audience clearly described and the rationale for engaging them well justified? Is the broader impact giving added value to your proposal? Is it grounded in the relevant literature? What are the creative and original elements? Is there supporting documentation? And are the output, the goals and objectives clearly defined and measurable? These are all things, and you can try to create a checklist and self-evaluate your own broader impact prior to submission. Next slide. And then I won't read this slide, but just to say all of these resources, and thanks to John, the URLs are on this slide. And I will end, I think the next slide is the end. And I think I'm fine for speaking with John that our inboxes are always open. Now you can go to the last slide, Remy. Our inboxes are always open, and we really do exist to help you with your proposals and anything else that we can assist you with. So feel free to email us whenever the need arises. And so I thank you very much for attention, and thank you to Effie and the Office of Research for giving John and I the opportunity to talk about this.
Thank you so much, Josh and John. This was really useful. As a person that's written a lot of NSF proposals and reviewed a lot of NSF proposals, thank you so much for such a comprehensive and useful discussion about this. We do have a couple questions in the chat for you, and you've talked a lot about the budget, but actually the first question is, may one explicitly budget for program activity or / activity evaluation? The NIH has walked back from this. Either of you, I mean, I think I know the answer to this, but do you have anything to say about that?
The answer is yes for NSF.
For NSF, you should be budgeting for everything you're going to do.
Yeah.
If you're not budgeting for things you're going to do, that raises a real red flag for both the program officer and the reviewer. So I don't know for NIH, but I can't imagine that NIH is going to approve an activity that's not budgeted for.
I mean, my experience, I mean, most NSF proposals at this stage actually require you to have a program assessment evaluation portion, which will require funding. And many of them actually require you to have an external evaluator even. So I would say my sense is for NSF grants that that it's expected that you budget for program evaluation. So this is an interesting question. So Josh, the question is, Josh Brumberg mentioned that we could get a letter from a school we have been collaborating with. Could we get a letter from a student in relation to engaging a diverse population of undergraduates in science?
I don't think a letter from an individual student would be that helpful. I mean, there is in your NSF biosketch, you know, there is a section called synergistic activities, and you can write about how you've been consistently training a diverse student body, and you can point out, in my lab right now, there's X this or Y that, and my campus is considered one of the most diverse, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, one new guidance, make sure that they know, is that NSF is now using a form. It used to be a free form for the biosketch. So make sure that you're using most up-to-date form. I know all the grants officers at CUNY are aware of that. And then the other thing I would say, when I was thinking about letters, is if you were proposing to do outreach in an elementary school, let's say, you would have a letter from an administrator or a teacher at that elementary school say, we really welcome Jane Doe to come to talk to our third grade classes about X, Y, and Z, and we will facilitate those visits.
Great. So actually, Adrienne Klein, hi, Adrienne, actually it's not a comment or a question so much as a comment, where she said, Portal to the Public is an organization that connects scientists to science museums and to their science public engagement programs nationwide, and fulfills as a fulfillment of a broader impact requirement. So we'll just add that. Thank you for sending that, Adrienne. We'll add that to the slide that has additional resources, because that's actually a really good resource. So this is a question: if you want to hire a company or person overseas, is it possible as part of your broader impact? Josh, John?
I'll
let John get that
Hire
one.
You can
engage a company.
it depends on what you're going to use them for. I mean, you can hire someone to serve as an evaluator, or you can hire someone to serve as a consultant. There is nothing that says you can't hire someone in another country. So it really does depend on what you're trying to accomplish here. There is nothing that says you're not allowed. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, but
I think I would need to know a little bit more about what you mean, what you want to hire them for. Yeah,
I mean, the NSF does encourage international collaborations, but it would just depend on what the collaboration, what the relationship is. Yeah. So Carolyn Pitt has the question: how would you balance a broader impacts proposal that includes a single distinctive activity, for example, a museum exhibit, with a list of more standard but real activities such as high school tours and local public talks, etc.? Do these more canned activities detract from a more interesting, creative, broader impact activity? So what's the balance?
I mean, it depends without knowing the specifics, but broadly speaking, as a reviewer, if every proposal says they're going to be educating students at some level, sometimes not undergrads, they might just say they're educating graduate students. But when you do something that's a little bit different, saying that you've created something and this is a museum, her example, I think from the reviewer's perspective, that seems as like a little bit better. And you can certainly then say, in addition to training undergraduates, and remember, the two things are not distinct. You can imagine a museum interaction of some sort, where the students in your lab would serve as docents or explainers, using the New York Hall of Sciences term, for that exhibit. So then you're integrating the education, the outreach, and the science all in one. And then that would be like the complete package that would really, I think, excite a reviewer.
I just want to highlight something that Tamara just responded to in the previous question, which I think is right on. If you're intending to hire someone outside the country, it should be well justified and clear why you can't find someone within the U.S. to do the work. So, for example, if you're doing research outside the country in Mongolia, and it's international research, and you want to hire somebody, it doesn't make sense to hire somebody in the U.S. if you're doing the research there. That's a clear justification why you need a contractor there to help you with your research. But it should be well justified if it's outside the US.
Yeah, I should have, so Associate Vice Chancellor Schneider is on our webinar today. She's the, and she also, prior to becoming the Associate Vice Chancellor, the Chief Research Officer for CUNY, she was also at the NSF. She was a program director there. So she also has some insight into these questions. We got a question from Jillian Baez, and I'm not quite sure. She said, can you offer some examples of reasonable outcomes for the behavioral sciences? Now, I guess this would be in the context of the broader impacts. I mean, this would be, I don't know, Josh, maybe can you address this? Does she mean like student outcomes, or what? Can you interpret that?
I'm not sure. I mean, I realize I'm a natural scientist, and that's the window in which I look at things. So I apologize for that. If you can imagine you're studying some sort of behavior. So imagine you're talking about how one group interacts with another group, and you're learning something about individual behavior. Maybe that could have some ramifications for public policy. So perhaps, and this is one of the points that John made at the beginning, outreach to government or policy-making groups. Perhaps your research would then lead to a change in the way something is done within society. That would be an example for a broader impact. If other things, if you're doing something and trying to understand how populations interact, and you can then create that into a classroom exercise, you could then disseminate that through a publication, or have a video discussion about it. So I'm not, without the exact specifics, but that's my best way of thinking about it.
Great. Actually, Josh, one thing, I mean, we're at the end of our questions from the participants, but I actually just wanted to mention that I was really glad that you had mentioned engaging with the offices of institutional research, and how, because I mean, as I said, having read a number of these broader impact statements and written them, I think, particularly because we come from an institution like the City University of New York, I feel like sometimes people can get a little lazy in terms of their broader impact, because they assume that we can just sort of rest on, oh, we serve a diverse student population. It's sort of like it seems almost self-explanatory to a lot of people why any research that we do or programs that we run at CUNY might have a broader impact. But I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about, because my experience also is that not many faculty know about the Office of Institutional Research, and also might not know that they have institutional research offices on their campuses. So could you maybe just say a little bit more about that, about the role of institutional research and data and the importance to broader impact?
Yeah. I mean, the only way when I was a junior faculty, the only way I knew about the Office of Institutional Research is in the pre-online days. We would get these surveys, and you had to reserve 15 minutes of one of your last classes for the students to fill out a survey that got sent to some office that I never knew existed. But now, when I've more on my administrative role, I've realized these are professionals just like we're professional scientists, professors, whatever. They're equally as well qualified in their fields, and they're deeply interested to see how students are doing. They're very skilled in evaluating students' performance, and the techniques and the skills they use in that venue can be very easily applied to understanding aspects of the broader impacts. And I think in my discussions with some of them in my own work, they get actually very interested, because this is a little bit different than what they do on a day-to-day basis, and they get excited by it. And they also have very, very good ideas. And so I really encourage, most cases, it's housed somewhere in the provost office. So if you go to your provost office website on your campus, you can then probably find the subpage. I also believe on the Office of Institutional Research at the CUNY Central, they have a list of all the campus contacts, similar to what exists on your page for the different aspects of research.
I should say that I just want to add to that. So there's broader impacts in your individual research, but there's broader impacts that your institution is also involved in. And here at CUNY, we have a huge broader impact, the impact that we're having on underrepresented minorities. I think every proposal, every NSF proposal should have some element of the importance, that important contribution that we're making to society. And I think individual reviewers don't understand the scope and the extent to which we're involved in that endeavor. And I'm not sure even our own researchers understand the scope of it. So I think it's important that we highlight it through, and I'm glad Josh raised this whole issue of providing data. The data do show it, and the data show the size of this effort.
Great.
And
Well,
and thanks to Tamara, who put a good answer, a better answer. As a behavioral scientist, she knows more about this than certainly I do. So I encourage everyone to read that in the chat.
yeah, and we could also make the chat. We get a transcription of the chat in the Zoom too, so we could also post that. But it is 1 o'clock, and in interest of the valuable nature of all of your time, I'm going to close out the webinar. But thanks again so much to Josh Brumberg and John Cepogus. And please, all of us are available by email, so email us your ideas about topics for upcoming webinars, and if you have any comments about this, and I will send all of the people that registered for this webinar, I will send you the link to all the materials from this particular webinar, which will be on our Funding Fridays website. And we encourage you to come to future webinars. So again, thank you so much, and good luck in all your funding endeavors. Bye-bye.
Best of
Bye.
luck in 2021. Be well.
Yes, be well, stay safe.
Bye-bye.